Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
Right at this moment, the world is struggling to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's bringing adversity of all kinds to millions of people. And it's only adding to the other challenges that people face all the time. Things like disease like cancer, death, divorce, job loss, poverty, and so much more. Dealing with adversity is nothing new, and frankly, it won't end with a vaccine to this disease. But what if there was a way to make adversity manageable? What if there was a way to take charge of it instead of it taking charge of you? Well, my guest, Kimberly Irvine, mom, speaker, and author of the new book, Stronger, is here to reveal how that can happen. So, Kimberly, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your really incredible and powerful story.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your brand new book that came out is called Stronger, and it's your story of dealing with repeated adversity. So can you just share a little bit of that story?
Sure. When I was at the age of 31, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I had just come out of being the caregiver to my mom, who actually had brain cancer a year and a half prior. And as you can imagine, being 31 and so young and being a mom of two small kids who were 6 and 4 years old, it was completely devastating. And so I went through that journey. I had chemotherapy and surgery and hormonal therapy, and I did pretty well in terms of, the recovery. And about 3.5 years later, the disease ended up coming back and my chest wall, and I recurred at the age of 35. And it's devastating, right? You not only deal with cancer once, but then it comes back. And the difference was my kids were 10 and 8, and they started to understand life and death. And so that hard reality of what we were all facing was the anxiety and fear was I going to beat it this time, right? And so I think we learned very hard that we really had to lean into something stronger for us, and that was our faith. And we continued to navigate that journey, which was challenging in itself, but we certainly learned how to overcome the adversity and how to pull together, as I'd say, as a family, right? When you're faced with something that's really beyond our control.
Well, and that's, and it puts a parallel to what's going on right now. And I don't know, on some level, a lot of what is so crazy is the uncertainty. You were given a diagnosis, which was not a very pleasant thing, nor was the treatment for it. And you were young, which was, it's amazing that they even found it because, of course, breast cancer is, I think they're now starting to recognize that young people can get it, but that's not the norm. And, it's the uncertainty that creates the challenge, and that's part of the adversity is right now we have people, it's like, we don't know. It's not that we don't know how people get it, but we don't know what it's going to look like when people do. Some people get it and they don't even know they have it, and other people it's killing them. And I guess in some respects that's not all that terribly different from cancer. So what you talk about your faith and you talked about your family. So of course it sounds like community is something that is very helpful when faced with adversity?
Yeah, and I would say this, right? I think overcoming the cancer not once but twice was a challenge. Obviously, I went through divorce and, dating and single parenting and job loss, right? All of those pieces of our adversity for us. But I think when we pull into where we're at today and having come through, all of that trauma, so to speak, and adversity, my daughter's 18 now and my son is 16, and we look at the world of this COVID-19 and kind of where we're positioned, it's just another trigger to the adversity and the trauma of what we're all experiencing. Yesterday I remember I was, walking upstairs and I was going to put some laundry in my room, and I overheard my 18-year-old daughter on the phone talking to a friend of hers, and she was saying that, I'm worried that my mom's going through the grocery store and she's so, immunocompromised, and what if she catches it? And then she started to say, I'm worried that if I go out, I could be a carrier and I can bring it home to my mom, and that it could potentially kill her. And what would I do without my mom? And I would have that guilt on my conscience for the rest of my life. And, it was at that moment as I fell to my knees and I had tears in my eyes, and I started to realize that, cancer still plays a part of our lives, that fear, that uncertainty, that lack of control. And the COVID-19 has just brought another layer to it, and that reality of what not only we are experiencing as a family, but everybody in this entire world. And so it brings me back to the place of, how do we deal with this adversity, right? How are we going to deal with the anxiety that's flooding our minds, the fear, and how do we get through it on a daily basis? And, I have some points here to make, right? The faith is one component. And I always say to people, right, it doesn't matter what your faith is, whatever higher power you believe in. I think that is the fundamental foundation that helped us when we went through treatment, especially as a child, my kids being, at those young ages. How do you really help your child understand that you're going to, potentially die? You don't have those answers, right? I mean, I didn't have those concrete realities to give. I mean, the only thing I could say is I was going to fight really hard. I had a great medical team, and that the truth of it was the man had the final say, right? God, we were leaning on God. And so I think for us, my message is, what is your foundation in terms of what your belief is in that higher power and that faith is a foundation? The second piece is really incorporating what I call the psychosocial approach, right? What are the things that you can do to lessen that burden of anxiety and fear and uncertainty? And I'm a huge proponent of, just wellness, whether it's what we're fueling our bodies with in terms of what we're eating, making sure we're eating healthy, balanced food and fueling our bodies properly, we're getting enough rest. And exercise is a huge component. I mean, obviously myself and my children have high anxiety as a result of what we've went through. And I think most people have that significantly right now. And so I'm a huge fan of just making sure every day we're getting that activity and we're getting, some of that relief out and getting those endorphins moving. And I think the other, key piece is just the educational component, right? And just making sure that we're aware of what's going on. We're not absorbing ourselves into the media, because I think, again, that can heighten the anxiety and the fear, but that we're really just coming together as a family and helping each other through those fears and anxiety, and knowing that we don't have a lot of control, but we're surely being smart about staying home and limiting our time outside and following all of the rules that are in place, which I think most people are doing, and there are some that are not. So, to really encourage, those pieces, I think is really the recommendations that I would give to others and that we're living every day.
Well, you bring up such a good point, because you're talking about the anxiety and the fear. And, one of the truisms is that, we can either feed this reaction, or we can kind of starve it. And, and the way you starve it is kind of like what you're talking about, is finding out as accurate information as you can, whether it's about a cancer diagnosis, whether it's about this COVID thing, whether it's about anything, because, the adage, knowledge is power, actually is true. And, and so, but also the idea of not getting caught up in, every little thing, every little detail, every little, and I mean, because that's crazy making. It really then makes you feel like you don't have any control, when you just talked brilliantly about the control that we do have, about taking care of our bodies and our minds, because anxiety and fear, there is a physiological response to that. There is physical things that happen to us, and we actually make ourselves more at risk when we have those things in our system, because that's something else for our immune system to try to deal with, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other piece that I would probably highlight too that I think is equally important, when we hit that diagnosis not once or twice, the first thing I did was, have my kids in therapy. I think it's important that people leverage that, especially in times like this. And as a matter of fact, I have a call into my daughter's doctor to kind of help her deal with some of this unsettled anxiety we're experiencing, because again, I think it's what we have control over, and what we have control over is our mind and our body and how we deal with it from day to day, and really staying present. That's another hard lesson that I think you have to learn when you're going through any type of adversity, is that if you stay present in the moment, you're certainly going to lessen that fear and anxiety and uncertainty and lack of control that you have. So I often will, even for myself, when I have those moments of worry and fear, I will just kind of bring myself back to center and say, let's focus on today, because today is really where the focus needs to be.
Well, because regardless of anything, none of us are guaranteed a tomorrow, even under the best of circumstances. So I love that idea of staying present in today and what can I do right now. And and I think one of the challenges of this particular illness, and although I do know I did some work in my early days with cancer patients and their families. And of course, I've had friends and family members who've also had dealing with cancer. And, the support system, who supports them, who disappears, this idea of how do we stay connected, even, I'm sure you had family members that didn't necessarily live close by that were interested and cared about you. And this is one of the things with this particular illness is we're supposed to social distance, but we still have to try to care, because that community, you with your family or with your friends, it helps. It's healing. It's supportive. It provides a buffer for us. It's part of the process that makes getting through this. I do think it increases the success rate, but it also makes it easier even if it's unsuccessful, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And I love the focus on your kids, because this is the piece that I really, for all parents out there, that children, especially when yours were so young, when you first got it 4 and 6, at that age, children have no ability to think abstractly. They're very concrete. And so what they understand and what they don't understand is very different than when they were older and you had your second go round with it. But we still need to give children helpful information, because they do pick up on the emotional energy, and they'll translate it however they want to translate it, and they don't always tell us what they're thinking or what they're afraid of, because one, sometimes they don't have the words, and two, they don't want to add to what, if we're already worried, they don't want to add to that. So I think that, even your daughter now who's 18, she's processing this still in much more of an adult way than when, you first got sick, but it's a continued processing of all of this. And I think it's important that we try to share and support them as best we can.
Well, and I think the other piece to add is that, everything's about age-appropriate information, right? And I think that's somewhat of a challenge I know a lot of parents face when they get diagnosed with cancer and they have children, is what do I say? Should I tell them? And then what am I telling them? And I think your point is so on target that children know. I'm a fan of not shielding children. I think that you have to be honest as best as you can. But the other layer to that is really ensuring that you're giving accurate, credible, age-appropriate information, and that you're bringing in experts to help them process the information. And as you can see in my situation, 2008 is when I was first diagnosed, and 2012 I recurred. And here we are in 2020, and we're still having to deal with the challenges, or what I call collateral damage, of cancer as we're facing COVID-19. And it's hard, right? I mean, for myself, I think through, gosh, I've fought cancer twice, and what if I catch COVID-19 and I can't overcome it? Gosh, that would be just devastating. But I just have to keep bringing myself and recognizing that, anxiety, fear, lack of control, and uncertainty are the 4 key words of where our country is today. And we have to do a better job at managing all of those concerns with the other pieces that I believe are a path of healing and giving that sense of control back as we navigate this just unfortunate, devastating situation.
Absolutely. This is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking with author, cancer survivor, and mom, Kimberly Irvin, about dealing with adversity. And right now, the challenges of it are inescapable, and it's important to not be overwhelmed by it. It's also important to prepare both for what's happening now and for the adversity that's going to come in the future. So if you're feeling flooded and anxious, please recognize that it's normal. But if you're struggling with managing it, then I invite you to reach out to me and, take advantage of my free strategy session. I'll talk to you about anything around this, how it's impacting you, how it's impacting your family, whatever, because right now we want you to get help. So shoot me an email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. Or you can give me a phone call at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. And I want to get back to Kimberly and talk about one of the biggest lessons of your journey that you learned was becoming your own advocate. So what does this mean? How did it come about? And why does it make such a difference?
Well, I mean, as I shared, I had been the care partner to my mom who had brain cancer prior to my diagnosis. So that was really kind of what I call the start of learning how to advocate for my mother's care. I mean, in a sense, right, we're all advocates. I was an advocate for, my children in a different way, and obviously advocating for my mom, but I had to become my own best advocate when I started my journey with breast cancer. I was the one who found my lump. I was the one that met with my OBGYN and showed her the lump and had her kind of dismiss me in terms of it's probably just a fibroadenoma. And it was my self-advocacy that persisted for the mammogram, which turned into an immediate ultrasound and a biopsy that found my diagnosis. So what I realized is that by being my own best advocate, I was the CEO of my own healthcare. I was the person putting all of these health professionals in place and managing it. Yes, they made recommendations of care, but I had the choice to follow those recommendations. And I think the other piece to the, advocacy component is when you really do take that role on, you're educating yourself. You're lessening the anxiety and the uncertainty and the fear, and you're giving yourself some type of control back. Let's face it, what we're facing today, we don't have control. We can do things to minimize it, right? We can certainly take precautions to minimize it. But I think, being our own best advocate really does allow us to overcome the adversity in a much calmer way. And that's, what I would recommend, to anyone is take control back as best as you can. And really advocate not only for yourself, but for your family, no matter what adversity you are facing in your life.
Right, because, and I think sometimes people are afraid to do that. I mean, you're talking about you did have some experience with your mom, and I actually learned through my mom because my brother was physically handicapped, and so I've watched her advocate with doctors. And so I was like, thanks, Mom. And, this idea that we, especially about our own bodies, we know what's wrong. We feel it. And trying to get the professionals, because like with you didn't fit the profile. You were way too young, and I'm going to assume there wasn't a history of it in your family, even though your mom did have some other kind of cancer. And so it's really easy to get dismissed by the quote unquote experts. And that's what you're talking about, is stepping up and going, no, I need this. Give this to me, right?
Yes. And I think that just, kind of coincides with where we're at today with COVID. I think that we all have adversity, right? I mean, we're struggling with so many different, issues right now related to the fear of getting the virus and transmitting the virus, to the challenges of job loss and, being at home with our loved ones. And all of that is just so heavy on our hearts and our minds. And I think if we could pull together and really try to stay present and do things that we've outlined, such as, really taking an active approach, advocating for ourselves and our families to navigate by staying present, leaning into our faith, making sure that we're taking that psychosocial support mechanisms, for all of our families with exercise and diet and sleep, and just, really kind of refocusing our energy on those components. I feel like we're going to be able to pull through this pandemic in a much more easier way. It doesn't minimize it by any stretch of the means, but I think what it will allow us to do is move forward in a new normal as we know it.
And, so I'm curious because there are some challenges right now, because and it's interesting, the choices that people are having to make right now in terms of being their own advocates. And being your own advocate doesn't mean necessarily getting a test, because that's still a big challenge. There are not a lot of tests out there, and they're having to be rationed, whether or not people know that. Not wanting to cause a panic, but it's so how to be an advocate, maybe in some non-traditional ways, and so part of that, like you're talking about, is being an advocate by eating well, because I know that a lot of times people right now are stress eating. They're going after the cookies and the ice cream and the Cheetos, and frankly, I don't blame them. I'm all for I love those things too, but that's not necessarily going to be a healthy thing for you to do. And even exercising, even with people who are being asked to, stay at home, you can still go out for a walk. And I think nature may be a really helpful thing if you can get out into nature, because nature's healing.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if there's opportunity for people to get outside and obviously staying away from the parks and crowds, I mean, I certainly would encourage that. I mean, for us, weather permitting, we're trying to get out as much as we can. But, going back to the food portion, to me, it's about the moderation. It doesn't mean that we don't want to go out and have ice cream or have a cupcake or any of those great, sweets. It's just about how do we balance it, right? And do we want to maybe shift that to the weekend when we've eaten really well during the week and we've given our body the foundational nutrients that it needs to get through with the proper sleep. And that's kind of how I live my life. That's what I've learned after coming out of cancer. It doesn't mean we don't have to have those things. And I know a lot of people end up, changing their diet so drastically and trying to cut out sugar. And, I don't drink, so that's a positive thing. But I think what I try to do is still experience life by eating the foods like pizza that, is my Friday night treat, or having, dessert on the weekends. So again, it just goes back to get outside and get some fresh air. Make sure you're getting 30 minutes of exercise. Calling and connecting with your loved ones, I think, is another piece that we've all lost sight of, where we're being forced to do it now, to where we're just reaching out and making sure that people are okay, whether that's family, friends, work colleagues, whatever it might be. Just checking in and letting them know, hey, I'm thinking about you. I have a really good friend of mine who lives in New York City, and it's just devastating what they're going through right now. And I just wanted her to know that, hey, I was thinking of her and I was praying for them, and, that I was here. And I think that's the kind of positivity and support that we need to give one another.
Well, and one of the things that it sounds like, that we can use adversity as an opportunity to refocus what matters to us. And going back to the cancer, almost to a person that I've met who've had cancer, they say, it changed how I looked at life. Not that they would wish it on anybody, but it actually shifted their focus. And I think that right now, and adversity can do that. We can either become overwhelmed by it, or we can see, what lesson do I want to take from this? How do I want to change my life to be more? And one of the things I think is this connection. And on some level, yay for technology, because we can now do, FaceTime, and we can see the people that we're talking to. And while it doesn't fully take the place of touching and hugging, which we're not supposed to do right now because we need the social distance, but we can reach out to those people that matter to us and really let them know. We can even reach out to the people in our own homes and let them know how much they matter to us. Because sometimes we get so caught up in the day-to-day living that although we keep thinking we have time, we keep thinking, I'll call them next week, or I'll call them, but no, do it now. That's part of being in the present, and that's one of the advantages that I've had, is that, when I think about it now, I'm not waiting. I'm actually just either texting the person or doing something to just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. What's it like where you are? How are you doing? Because I think that that's the community that in some respects we've gotten away from, even within our own families. I know that I've talked to, my two sisters more in the last 6 months than I have, for lots of different reasons, but that I have for the previous years. And it's now becoming a priority for us to keep that going.
Yeah.
So is there any other advice that you would give to people in this challenging time, just in dealing with adversity generally?
No, I think, again, let's just recap the points that we discussed. I think it's really about staying present. I think it's recognizing that we are anxious and fearful and uncertain, and we don't have much control. But what we can do is take control of what we know, and that's really lessening the fear and the anxiety, and starting to look at your home and think of ways that you can, really advocate for your family and deal with the adversity that we're being faced with, whether that's reaching out to family, friends, and coworkers, checking in on them, leaning into our faith or higher power, using exercise as a foundational tool every single day, making sure that we're eating healthy and within moderation, getting enough sleep. I'm a fan of just really trying to minimize the time in front of a TV listening to the media, because I realize that could be a bit overwhelming. And then the last piece is just really being grateful and counting our blessings. I'm a huge fan of that. Every single day I'm recognizing that, and I think it's important.
And actually, we have proof that it actually changes our emotions and how we view the world. So absolutely being grateful for what we have. And so, Kimberly, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. And can you please tell people where they can get your book, where they can learn more about how to become stronger and how to take on this fear head on?
Sure. So my book is called Stronger, Becoming My Own Best Advocate and Discovering My Purpose. You can find the book. It's available on Amazon. And also you can learn more about me on my website at www.kimberlyirvine.com. That's KIMBERLYIRVINE.com.
So what we've been talking about today, and what I want you to know, is that adversity is not the enemy. It's actually a natural part of life. So it's your response to it that will make you or break you. And I've long said that the only thing any of us has any control over is our actions. Not the events in your life, but what you do in response to those events. That's where you have all the power and control. And in fact, it's the only place you have power and control. So I'm hoping that one of the things that you'll choose to do is to keep listening to this show. And until next week, stay loving.